It's time for the Rick Smith Show. Now, here is the voice of the working class, Rick Smith.
Welcome, brothers, sisters, working class heroes. This is the Rick Smith Show. Thanks so much for being here today on the big program. Lots to get to, lots to talk about. I got to tell you, I was hoping for better news to start the week. I was hoping for something good to start with. I was hoping for another big win for the UAW last week in their union vote at Mercedes-Benz in Alabama. But it appears that the UAW's organizing push has hit a bit of a speed bump. And, well, while you had 2,045 Mercedes workers saying, yes, we absolutely want a union, 2,642 voted against. And look, that's not the end of the story. This is kind of a repeat, I think, of what we saw at Volkswagen. But you do have 2,045 people who say they want a union. So I'm going to bet they're going to be staying active, especially if Mercedes goes back on what they said they were going to do, on their promises. And because they did a lot of that. They did a lot to keep the union out. Because if you remember, the UAW, went through this in Tennessee. The big blowout victory they had just a couple of weeks ago is the remnants of this kind of a Volkswagen saying, hey, we're going to make a bunch of promises, and didn't. Because if you remember, after the UAW's victory in Tennessee, I didn't say the vote in Alabama was a slam dunk. It's one of those, don't know. And the pressure that these workers were under, just incredible. The captive audience meetings, the constant harassment in the workplace, and then all of the stuff in the community with business leaders and religious leaders, politicians doing their foolhardy best to, threaten and intimidate. And the reality is, especially in Alabama, people have been trained since conception to hate labor unions. So the fact that you got such a large percentage of people to say yes is encouraging. And understand, and I think Sean Fain said it best. He says, I know what these workers are put under. It's just another indicator, another issue with this nation of how poorly the laws are structured for working class people. He said, all the laws made favor business. The courts are structured to favor business over people. And that's reality. The fact that these workers had to endure, the kind of captive audience meetings and harassment, not just again from the employer, but all of the societal pressures, kind of a big deal. Now, the union had reported that they had a supermajority of cards signed. And this, again, shows just how effective these union busting campaigns are, how effective these threats and these intimidation tactics are. Now, here's the thing. They made a lot of progress here. And in a press release, the UAW said, look, these workers, they won some major things. They won some serious gains in this campaign, something they called the UAW bump. They said that they killed the wage tiers. They got rid of a CEO that nobody seemed to like, had no interest in making life better there. They, because of this campaign, because of their efforts, have made their lives and their jobs better. Now, will that hold? And as they pointed out, look, in 2019, Volkswagen did the same thing. And in 2024, the workers realized it's not about a CEO. It's about having some power, having a voice on the job. That, having that union contract, that is what you should be fighting for. And I love the way that Fain, and the UAW framed it. Look, this is a David Goliath fight. And sometimes Goliath wins a battle, but David wins the war. And the idea being, look, you're going to pick up yourself off the dirt. You're going to brush off and you're going to move forward. What these workers do from this point forward is up to them. And he's very clear about that. Look, we're here to ensure that workers' lives get better. And the fact that there are more than 2,000 workers at Mercedes in Alabama who want to join a union, they're going away. And as they point out in their piece, the sun will rise and the sun will set, and our fight for justice for the working class will continue. And I got to tell you, I love that frame, because it really is. It's about the frame that I talk about all the time: union job, better life. They're walking the walk, talking the talk, and doing everything they can do to make this possible. Now, we'll see what happens in the coming elections. There are a couple more that are potentially going to happen in the coming weeks and months. Hyundai in Montgomery, Alabama. I understand there are 30% or more that have signed cards there. You also had a Toyota in Missouri, Troy, Missouri, I believe, that they're at that threshold where there's going to potentially an election. So down the road, we're going to see more opportunities. And this is a good thing. Understand, this isn't one and done. This isn't, they're going to go away. I truly believe, Fane, when they say they're not going anywhere. So this is, again, the start of something that I hope is big. Now, I had hoped that the workers would have pushed back against the intimidation, pushed back against, the stuff that they had to endure. But we'll see. And again, for all of us, the rest of us, how bad are our labor laws that you have to endure that kind of abuse? Want to hear your thoughts? Email me, rick@thericksmithshow.com. Quick break, right back.
From the steel mills of Pennsylvania to the auto factories of Michigan to the modern makers movement, manufacturing makes our nation great. I'm Scott Paul, president of the Alliance for American Manufacturing. We bring business and labor together to advocate for policies that everyone can agree on. Together, we can strengthen manufacturing and create good-paying American jobs. Help us keep it made in America.
The old factory towns in America's heartland have been taking a beating. Thing is, though, there's a light at the end of the tunnel. The new CHIPS bill that got passed will bring jobs back home and has already resulted in big announcements of major new factories opening. The American Recovery Package has allowed cities and counties to hire new police officers and firefighters and start rebuilding their communities again. We're finally turning things around after 40 years of screwing over working people. But will we keep moving in the right direction? That's our choice.
So last week, another charter school week. It seems to me like they're almost every other week at this point. And you go, well, how did you know last week was charter school week? Well, my email box inundated with well-paid spokespeople out there pimping the wares and also spreading the ills of government schools. I can't tell you last week how many times I read government schools. Not your local public schools, not your local public schools, but government schools. And interestingly enough, this week comes right after Teacher Appreciation Week, which is just, again, weird. And I guess this is what they do. But again, another gimmick. They've got all of these different gimmicks on how they're going to destroy and take away public education from us. If it's EITCs, the Educational Improvement Tax Credits, or the ESAs, or the PPPs, or the EMOs, or the EIEIOs, well, they're going to figure it out. If there's a gimmick, if there's a way to get into taxpayers' pockets and privatize education and, take from our kids, they're going to figure it out. I'm here to share some questions on how do vouchers defund public education. I've asked my next guest to come talk with us. Josh Cowan is a professor and author of the book, The Privateers, How Billionaires Created a Culture War and Sold School Vouchers. Josh, thanks for taking time for us.
Yeah, thanks. Happy to be here.
So, last week, like I said, inundated with all of these. We've got this privatization scheme. We've got this other scheme. Your local public school's bad. This new shiny thing, good.
Right.
It really is remarkable how much of our tax dollars they put in to convincing us how bad our public schools are.
Right. Yeah, that's right. And in the case of the voucher system in particular, you have a new bill in Pennsylvania coming through that's specifically based on this. In most other states, these voucher schemes, so these are taxpayer-funded private school tuition schemes. They first begin with the idea that public schools are failing parents, and that parents should have a right to take their kids out of the public school system on the taxpayer dime and move them to whatever type of school they would like to go to. Those are two different sort of pieces, right? It's the parents' rights version of things. We could talk about that if we need to, but then in particular, this idea that public schools are failing and that we should provide taxpayer-funded alternatives to that. It's not how the data look, and it's not what the evidence says, but that's what they say.
No, it's quite remarkable on what liberties they take.
Sure.
And what's interesting to me is, in places that don't have a lot of charter schools or a lot of these gimmicks, a lot of rural communities, these ideas are it's amazing to me, but are really popular given the fact that I don't think people understand that it's going to destroy their local public schools. They don't have those competing systems yet. But when they do, those local schools are going to suffer. And we see this going on right now in Iowa, because Iowa just passed a really horrible bill that's going to cost the public school system millions of dollars. And, we got schools doing 3-4 days a week now instead of 5.
Right. So it's important to sort of think through how this works. And there are actually a number of rural Republicans. There's bipartisan opposition to vouchers in rural communities for the simple reason, as you already suggested, that there aren't any private schools for kids to go to, or there are very few of them in these rural communities. But that doesn't mean that rural communities and communities that don't have a ton of private schools aren't at funding risk. So the first way that vouchers defund public schools is at the state level. And the reason for that is that it's despite all the rhetoric about giving parents a choice to send their kids to these schools, 3/4 of voucher users in state after state after state that's passed these schemes, 3/4 are already in private school, or at least have never attended public school. They're in homeschool or something like that. So what that means automatically right off the bat is that these voucher schemes are benefiting people who are not sort of attending public schools for the most part in the first place. The way that they defund the public education system, though, is because over time states can't afford to stand up two sectors of education. They're already committing dollars. Most state constitutions tell them they have to commit dollars to public educations. And yet what happens when states decide to take on a new cost that's currently borne by the private sector by increasingly wealthy parents who are getting these voucher schemes, the state just can't afford to do it, and they slow down public spending. 6 out of the last 7 states that have passed voucher schemes have failed to keep up with the national average on public school spending. So that's the first thing to know. The second thing to know is that in the local districts that do lose a handful of kids to a few private schools, again, we're only talking about 1/4 of total voucher users, or so 20 to 25%. But those at the district level, those kids do leave, and they take some state dollars with them. Meanwhile, all of the costs stay with the district. The analogy I use is I have a daughter in college. I have a second one about to go. Just because I have 2 children who have left the home for 9 months out of the year, that doesn't mean I have to stop paying mortgage on their bedrooms, right? I still have a fixed home, and I still have my utilities, and I still got to pay for the whole thing, despite the fact that 2 of my kids are now gone. That's actually kind of how it works in the public school communities that lose. They might only lose 5 or 6 kids, but those 5 or 6 kids take really, really important dollars with them when they go.
No, and that's important to point out that you can't have competing systems. And this is where I've been a supporter of public education, because it is public. If we're not happy with what's going on, we can change it, as opposed to the private sector, which is take it or leave it, or we're just gonna, if your kid's not keeping up, we're just throwing them back somewhere else, which then ends up, the public school then becomes a default for, well, all of the creaming that goes on in these other schemes. For me, I want to use those dollars most efficiently as possible by creating the best opportunities for all kids, not just mine, but all of them. And I don't think that that's really what we're being preached to.
No, and in fact, one of the misconceptions is that that the private sector is providing this elite alternative that only a handful of kids get, and that a voucher system would give some children the ability to leave so-called failing schools for those elite providers. That's actually not the typical private school. The typical private school is what I call a subprime private school. You mentioned PPP in your open. A typical private school is actually desperate to get the taxpayer bailout that comes with a voucher system. They're not particularly high quality. I mean, for every elite academy or whatever it is that do exist and states do have, there are dozens and dozens of struggling schools, financially distressed schools that aren't very good at actually educating children. And so what we've found over the last decade, as voucher systems have spread across the country and have grown into statewide bases, is that the users of those subprime schools have shown some of the largest negative declines in academic outcomes that we've ever seen in any question in the research community in education. It's really in terms of just the scale and the size of the negative impact. You have to go to something like the COVID-19 pandemic itself, or Hurricane Katrina down in New Orleans, to really get the magnitude of the academic decline for the kids who do transfer using these voucher schemes. And again, the reason for that is they're not going to these elite providers. They're going to these subprime schools that are desperate for the financial bailout. And so it's really not even sort of true on its own right. It'd be one thing, we could have the debate if a handful of children were going to these private schools and were doing better, but that's actually not what happens. Even those kids that do leave are really suffering academically as a result.
No, I remember when the voucher things first came out. We had a state senator. His name was Mike Fulmer. He was the guy who evidently took it from somebody else and slapped his name on it because he didn't actually read it. But I had asked him, I said, look, if I get one of these golden tickets, can I send my kids to the Abington Friends School in Philadelphia, which I know at the time was charging somewhere in the neighborhood of $40,000 a year for kindergarten? And he said, absolutely. It will cover all the costs and transportation. And I'm going, no, Senator, your bill is very clear that it's only going to pay what my local school district was paying for my child's education. I would have to come up with the rest, which is well above my ability to pay. So you're peddling false stuff here.
Not only that, but what we've seen, and you mentioned Iowa a couple of minutes ago, we've seen new data just 2 weeks ago came out from Iowa from researchers at Princeton University who looked at this question. These private schools, as soon as the voucher comes, guess what they do? They increase tuition up by a substantial portion, even up to and including part of the voucher that they're getting. So it's not even about sort of big access. But the other thing to remember too about these schools is even if the tuition matched the voucher, there's nothing in these bills, and in fact, the latest round of voucher bills actually protect the school's ability to turn away anyone they want. They can discriminate against anyone they want. When it comes to vouchers, it's not actually the school choice; it's the school's choice, and that's what we have to remember about this. The schools get to pick any child they want. And even when they get to pick the kids they want, it turns out they don't do very well, at least not on academics. So the whole thing it's what I call it when I visited your state in Pennsylvania a few months ago, and I testified to the Pennsylvania legislature, and I warned them. I said, vouchers are the education equivalent of predatory lending. That's exactly what they are. The outcomes are terrible. Most parents don't get the results that the schools promise for them. The whole thing is just a scheme.
So basically what you're telling me is, if I get one of these golden tickets, or if you're anywhere in the country, you're not going to be able to send your kids to Oxbridge Academy and rub elbows with Barron Trump then.
No, no. The school gets to decide if they're going to take you, and not only on the front end when they admit you, but they can decide if you get to stay too.
Right, because that's the thing that gets me. A lot of people believe that it's going to give my child, and look, every parent, I believe, wants the best for their kids and wants to get them the best opportunities they're going to get, maybe the opportunities they didn't have. So this idea, this sales job, this con job they're throwing out there, that, hey, if I get this, my kid's going to have this opportunity to rub elbows with the upper crust. And as you're saying, that's not reality, not even close to reality.
The false promise, and it's the education equivalent of predatory lending.
So how do we undo this? Because here's what bugs me, and here cyber charters are a big thing. Vouchers are a completely different issue. Yeah. Cyber charters here are a big thing too.
Yeah.
And again, it's all about taking public tax dollars that are supposed to go towards educating my kids and their friends and giving them the best opportunity that they have, and then dividing it into different pots and somehow putting a profit motive in there. But nothing drives me crazier than when I'm driving down the road and I hear a radio advertisement telling me how wonderful this charter system is and how wonderful this charter school is, knowing that that's my tax dollar paying for that ad and not in a classroom educating a kid.
It's funny you mentioned cyber charters. You have to, the only other sort of man-made or person-made education intervention that has performed as poorly academically as vouchers have are cyber charters. Again, you have to go to something like a natural disaster, Hurricane Katrina, or the pandemic itself, that those impacts on test scores to get the magnitude of what we're talking about. And cyber charters come close. The cyber charter piece is would be funny if it wasn't so tragic, because when you talk to the voucher lobby, and these guys go at me all day, when you say, there aren't very many private schools in rural communities, you know what they say? They say, it's okay, we'll create online or cyber learning environments for kids. I mean, so that's one thing that they'll say. And then the other side of the mouth, they'll say, well, we need more vouchers because the pandemic, public schools failed students during the pandemic by not opening fast enough and by staying online, by staying in cyber learning. And so to the extent, and listen, most parents will tell you they wanted their kids back in school, and if they didn't, they had a really good reason to, like a health reason or whatever. But we know that it's good for kids to be in school, to be physically in school. That's certainly true. But the idea that we're going to go to a voucher system, and in particular, rural communities, we're going to build out private schools with a cyber charter type approach, or cyber charters themselves, the same people who are telling you that public schools failed kids by staying online too long during the pandemic, are the same people now pitching you on cyber charters and on cyber vouchers, because, as you suggest, sort of this fits their business model a little bit more carefully. So you have to kind of think about they're talking on two sides out of their mouth on this one.
But again, for me, it's all about destroying what the people hold as the commons.
It is.
The idea of destroying public education, because it is the one thing that unites us. And it seems to me that there are those people with a lot of money in some cases, Jeffrey Yaz here in our state, who want to segment that off. Well, we don't want to interact with you. You name the group, and this is another way to slice and dice and divide, especially the working poor, because those are where all the bad ideas and the gimmicks and the schemes seem to start before they then move on to other areas. I'm curious your thoughts on that.
Well, I'll go you one further. In Pennsylvania, the draft legislation that I've read in that state would actually require your state, the Pennsylvania State Department of Education, to inform parents in the public school districts that are struggling that they can and should move into a voucher scheme, which is really basically means that the current legislation would require the state to come in and advertise against the local school communities to try to move dollars out of those local communities. It would require the State Department of Ed to do that. It's really built to undermine, defund, and eventually sort of break apart public school systems. Betsy DeVos in my state, 50 miles west of me, she has said publicly over and over and over again, if it's not Jeff Yass in Pennsylvania, it's Betsy DeVos, I promise you. She has said she doesn't want public schools to remain the centers of community. She wants to bring back an era where she says churches were the centers of community, and that's what the voucher scheme is all about there. It's certain what it is not is anything resembling a grassroots movement. It is Betsy DeVos, it is Jeff Yass, it is Charles Koch, it is a couple of billionaires in West Texas. It is not really a bunch of people clamoring for this stuff. It is a billionaire funded operation through and through.
No, and the thing, again, I go back to what I said a minute ago. Every parent wants their kid to get the best opportunity. So if you're constantly being told your local school is bad, give me enough time and repetition, I'll convince you the sky's green. And that's what they've done. They've convinced people that their local schools are bad in a lot of cases, and that this wonderful, this gimmick over here, that's their future. And the sad reality is it's fool's gold.
It sure is. It's the education equivalent of predatory lending. It pitches people, preys on their hopes and dreams for their children, their deepest fears and concerns for their kids, and it says, we are going to offer you a solution. And unlike, say, a new car or a used car that you're going to find out pretty quickly if it's busted or if it's a lemon, it's going to start to break down on the highway. It could take years and years and years to learn that the school serving your kid failed and is failing on a monthly and yearly basis for the kids. It's, I'm an education professor in my day job. I teach teachers. I couldn't go down the street and pick out automatically a high quality school. It's really hard to do. You have to look at it. You have to trust yourself. You have to look at your opportunities if you can. But the idea that parents are going to kind of just shop around for schools, and if one doesn't fit, then they'll just move their kid to another. That's not how it works for most parents. And again, most of these schools are just simply promising, as you say, fool's gold, as I say, the education equivalent of predatory lending.
Yeah, I mean, so the question then becomes, how do we as parents, how do we as voters, taxpayers, wade through all this? Because look, we're inundated with Madison Avenue kind of advertising. We're inundated with all of these wonderful success stories that seem almost too incredible to believe. At least on my radio, there's this stuff.
Well, listen, I mean, there's a reason, most of the bills in the last 18 months, most of the voucher schemes that have passed in red states. Now, Pennsylvania is not a red state; it's a purple state. It could go either way in the upcoming election. But the reason I bring this up is that in those states, even in those states, so this is for the most part a right-wing push, this voucher push. But even in those red states, it's the votes in the state legislatures are incredibly close, in part because rural Republicans aren't buying what these billionaires are selling, and they don't like these things. So it's a cobbling together that the other side has to do to get these things passed. And that's with a lot of backdoor legislative shenanigans. I mean, I don't even know this stuff's not my profession, but you hear this reported out, overnight votes, secret stuff, throwing things into ballots. And the reason that has to happen is that most voters, most parents don't want these schemes. It's not like there's this mass movement where we have to go out and tell parents, no, you're wrong on this one. Parents are smart. Voters are smart. They know this stuff is garbage. But what's happening is these really, really well-funded organizations are going to state legislators, their primary vulnerable legislators, vulnerable Republicans. They're picking off votes one by one to eke these things through. And yet it remains true that when vouchers go to statewide ballot, there has never been a successful statewide ballot initiative that supports voters. Time and time again, voters have rejected ballot initiatives when they're given a choice on vouchers. In Arizona in 2018, the voters overwhelmingly rejected a voucher scheme there. And then you know what the Republican governor did 3 years later, 2021? He rammed it through a legislature anyway. So some of this just comes down to holding folks accountable when they vote against the will of the people. Because parents and voters they smell a rat here on this one, and they're right to do so.
No, I like your frame of it's just like predatory lending. That is a perfect frame. It's amazing stuff. But Josh, I appreciate you taking some time filling us in. Good stuff. Hope folks will take a look at the book, The Privateers, How Billionaires Created a Culture War and Sold School Vouchers. Josh Cowan, thanks so much.
Appreciate it. Take care.
Want to hear your thoughts. Have you bought into these schemes, or is it just the legislature's ramming it through? Because, well, maybe there's money on the other side. I know there's a lot of money in this. Want to hear your thoughts? Email me, rick@thericksmithshow.com. Quick break. Right back.
I've been driving buses for 5 years, and my day-to-day routine is I wake up a little earlier than most people. I get on a bus, I go out, I pick up some students and make sure they get to school nice and safe. Here in Fairbanks, Alaska, that can be a challenge because of the winter weather and the icy roads. But I love the job. So the Teamsters are great. They provide us a lot of protections. They've always taken care of their people, made sure that our jobs were secure. We didn't have to worry about whether or not we'd have a job from day to day.
And that's amazing because before we'd be working 4, 6, 8 hours a day and only earning minimum wage was real difficult to make a living. Then the Teamsters pushed a law so we make something we can live off of and not have to have a second job. What absolutely gives me peace of mind, the union membership allows me to focus on this job without having to worry about whether or not my family is going to be taken care of. I'm Andrew Case, and I'm proud to be Teamsters Local 959.
So come middle of June, all eyes are going to be on Colorado as there's a special election. One that I've been keeping an eye on because I think this is one of those great opportunities to throw one of the horrible conservatives out of Congress. But June 25th in Colorado, the 4th congressional district is having a special election. Ken Buck has stepped aside, retiring, getting out of the mix, and kind of in a sticking it to someone way, triggered this special election so that Lauren Boebert couldn't, just walk into it. And I love the fact that that's what's happened. But there's an opportunity here, not just to throw someone like Boebert to the curb, but to actually bring someone in who truly understands what it means to be a working person and the struggles of average, everyday working people. And that's why I've asked Trisha Calvarese to come talk with us. She's the Democratic candidate for Colorado's 4th congressional district there in this special election. Trisha, thanks for taking time for us.
Oh my goodness. Thank you so much, brother. I'm thrilled to be here. Thank you so much. I'm a huge fan. Thank you.
Love having you on the program. And look, I love what you're doing out there talking about not just your story, but the story of working people. I saw your video and it touched me in a way that many don't, but it's that story of, hey, I was leading my life. My parents got sick. I had to come back and take care of them. And then all of the things that went into that, those are stories we need to hear more of.
Absolutely. And I am so fortunate that I could come home back to my home district where I went to public schools, born and raised, grew up when there were wild horses, right, in this part of Colorado. And, I went east because that's where my opportunity was. That's where my full academic scholarship to Johns Hopkins was. But, being far apart from my parents, trying to coordinate care was always a challenge. Thank goodness for my local AFG 3403. I knew they'd have my back. So when my mom got her diagnosis of pancreatic cancer, I was able to drop everything, move back home to Highlands Ranch, and provide end-of-life care for her through home hospice. And she'd been taking care of my dad too, because they were older, and he had kidney cancer, but he was on this amazing medicine because of his union pension benefits. He'd worked for the SEC, and his union had his back. So he was able to be on this remarkable medication. It extended his life many years, but he passed days after my mom. So again, I'm an only child. Thank goodness I could be there. I'm stepping up to run because no one should have to depend on luck. And as it is right now, there are not enough people in unions to be able to have the benefits that I did to be there for their parents.
Yeah, when I tell stories that how fortunate I've been throughout my working life to have a union to make sure that I don't lose my job because I got sick or a family member got sick, or the health care that we've got that, when I had my hip replaced, it was $120 out of pocket, start to finish. I don't say that to brag. I say that because I want people to know that it's out there and it can be gotten, because we've been sold on this idea. Well, there's no other way. The Tina mentality. Well, there's no alternative. And there is. And that's why I think your story is special in that, when we talk about family values, we never really talk about the kind of stuff that you had to do and how you get to do it. And I think it's important that we do.
And my parents, to be very clear, they were conservatives. They were Catholic, they were Christian, and they raised me on those values 100%. And my dad's union, my union aligned with that completely, that I was able to come home and they were able to pass at home with dignity. And again, that time, being able to drop everything, leave my job, know that I would be covered, know that I would still have an income, know that I would still have insurance. I could drop all of it and be there for my mother, who I had realized, oh my goodness, this was a burden she had carried her whole life, where she was worried about this moment where, she's going to pass. She needs somebody there at the end to help lift her final, suffering, the final care. And to be there was the greatest gift I've ever had. That's, again, something everybody, every working person, everybody should have that right, should have that ability to take care of their family and should be able to help them, pass it home if that's what they want. It was the most precious time that I ever had. Yeah, absolutely. Sorry, getting a little teary at it, but this is coming for so many people in my generation. I'm an elder millennial, or geriatric millennial, as they say. And, my heart breaks for so many people in your generation, Rick, right, of Gen X, where folks are taking care of, their kids and their parents at the same time and working. So I wish for those folks a union, because a union contract is the best way to make sure that your family has what it needs in order for you to be able to take care of them directly.
And again, that's a message we don't hear almost ever. And especially in the halls of power. And this is why I've said for years, I want people who are gonna know what walking a mile in my shoes is like. I'm gonna want people in Congress, in state legislatures, who know what it's like to sit down at the kitchen table and worry about, am I gonna be able to pay the rent? Am I gonna be able to put money away for my kids' college? What's gonna happen at the end? Will I be able to care for myself? And to have policies and people pushing policies that are going to help families get through these moments, not do it for them, but give them the opportunity to be able to do it. And I fear that we're going to a direction where that's no longer possible.
I mean, that's right. And the caregivers, the care providers. I just want to talk about my hospice nurse who is there for my mom. Right? There's some questions where you go through end of life, like where you're like, oh my goodness, this doesn't seem right. Like, help me through this. Help me through this. Where she wasn't just there for my mother, she was
Yeah.
there for me. Right. And then days later, when my father passed, she made sure she was the one there. So a second time she came back for my father. And I know that I was just one call of the night, that is her literal job. For me, I will never forget her. She was a stranger and she showed up for me. That woman should absolutely have enough income and benefits to take care of her own family, right? Like, what an absolute angel who goes above and beyond every single day in her line of duty and in her work. What dignity. It's the dignity of work. And for working people is what I'm stepping up for, Rick. Absolutely.
No, and I know I spent some time on your website and saw some things that you wrote about your parents, and especially your father. A Rocky Mountain News story from 2003 of you guys collecting toys for, for the holidays for disadvantaged, or for a women's battered shelter, battered women's shelter, and it got me thinking. We get into this red hat, blue hat stuff. We get into who'd you vote for in the last election instead of who people were. And you said your father was a conservative Republican, which I don't think is recognizable in today's political climate. But it wasn't about who you voted for in that last election back then. That wasn't what you wore on your sleeve. So I kind of wonder, as you were brought up in this, what did you take from that upbringing?
Yes, sir. It's about our values. It's about the shared values of care, respect, dignity, community, right? That you always step up and serve wherever you can and you do as much good as you can. And I will say this, before my dad passed, he knew, Ken Buck was stepping down and he said, step up. This is a community that raised you. It's time to give back. Step up and serve. So, in a way, it was my very first endorsement. And, it kind of makes me tear up to think about it, but his dying wish in a way, right? To step up and serve out of dignity, out of those principles that are enduring, right? That we maybe have forgotten about. But where we're a community, you don't leave people behind. You step up, you serve, you care about your community. And I'll even say this, my mom was a Trump supporter. She loved him. She came from Pennsylvania. She came from a coal town. She knows what it's been like for decades of offshoring and outsourcing and being left behind. And I think, honestly, her heart was a little bit heartbroken that even when it was time for me to find an opportunity, I had to go east. Because you know what? There are no 4-year colleges or universities in my district. So that is what I'm fighting for. It's on those values of making sure that people can, they can stay home, they can participate in their own communities, and they can find a pathway to the middle class and to support their own families too, wherever they were raised.
No, and I'll tell you, this is part of what I think Biden has done very well. This idea of investing in communities, making local communities the future instead of the past. In 2022, we did one of our working class hero tours, and we went to places that used to be. Places that used to have factories, that used to create jobs, that used to create the kind of living that we now pine for. This year, we're working on a program to do another working class heroes tour, going to places that are going to be. where we're investing in infrastructure, we're investing in new technologies, we're investing in the future. But sadly, this election is going to come down to the people that we put into those halls of power, if we maintain that direction or if we fall backwards, which again is why I think having someone with a working class background like you in the halls of Congress is so vitally important.
Yes, sir. And who even understands the origin of these bills and what the intention was. It is the Build Back Better with unions agenda. So when I talk to the business manager of the building trades of Colorado, and he's telling me, hey, we're kind of struggling with getting PLAs established from the beginning for this funding that's coming from the Build Back Better agenda. You send me to Congress, I promise you, day one, I'm going to be writing letters to the Department of Commerce asking them to help work with me to get this resolved. Because if it's a problem in Colorado, it's a problem writ large. Like, let's get those PLAs set. And I understand it. Like this is we're bringing unions in our movement where it hasn't been before. So it just, we got to educate folks. We got to make sure it's there in the beginning. But we need a champion who understands that was the spirit of the law. That's what it's there for. That's where the money is. And I'm going to go in fearlessly and fight for it.
And again, I come back to, it's rare you hear a politician who talks about PLAs and actually knows what they are.
You said politician. I was like, who, where is she? Who are you talking about? But
you're a politician, Trisha, you're running for office.
Right. But I am a union sister. I am a union, acolyte. I'm here to preach about the labor movement and to move the ball forward. Because you know what? I have a shirt on right now, AFT. I am a product of AFT teachers. That was the greatest gift I ever had. I didn't do anything. I was simply born and I went to Douglas County Public Schools. One of the greatest things you could ever give a student, right, is the gift of an excellent public school education. So you better believe I'm turning right back around and I'm going to fight for the collective bargaining rights of teachers in Colorado and in the 4th District. Absolutely. Because they've been stripped. Collective bargaining rights can just be taken away like that from certain municipalities, from city governance. That's why we need the PRO Act and Public Sector Freedom to Negotiate Act.
No, and this is where having people who understand that in those positions is vitally important. But I do, as I said, I spent time watching your video, and one of the things that jumped out at me is you asked a simple question, and it said, you said, what if we voted for dignity and hard work? And, because our framing normally is red hat, blue hat, right, left. The reality is most issues aren't right, left, or red hat, blue hat. They're up, down. It comes down to, do you have enough money and power to get what you need, or don't you? But when you ask this question, what if we voted for dignity and hard work instead of what's been force fed to us? I said, that's the right frame. And, explain that a little bit, what you meant by it.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, compare me and Lauren Boebert, right? We're both millennial women. We've both had family obligations. We both have careers. And just where she was disrupting people's evening out at the Buell Theater, that working people had, paid their, saved money to go to that experience. She'd ruined it at Beetlejuice, flipped off work, made those working people at Buell Theater. It's stressful enough of a job. You don't need a congressperson vaping in the face of a pregnant person and flipping you off too. Right. So I'm at the same time, Lauren Boebert was doing that. You know what I was doing? I was a federal employee fighting with everything I had to move the agenda forward, to bring STEM education and pathway jobs into the middle class back to places like Colorado without requiring a 4-year university degree. That's what I was doing. So that's when I say hard work, I mean myself personally, a hardworking person with dignity. And for all the people who have been working so hard for so long, I see y'all. I'm one of y'all. So I'm stepping up to represent all of us.
No, every presidential election, I say, I hope this president is the person who brings reward back to work. And I want to say that about, congressional people, who's going to be the one who's going to step up and get that legislation move forward that returns reward to work. Because the reality is, and I go back to your parents' generation, they benefited from a very strong labor movement, union density as high as 35% in the late 60s. They benefited from a culture of shared prosperity, whereas the future generations, and right now, we have a situation where corporate America is basically gouging our eyes out. And it doesn't seem like there's enough in Congress to wake us up to that and to fight back on that.
Absolutely. And that's what's so interesting about being like an elder millennial. Like I am a bridge. You see these younger kids, like they're ready for a revolution today, right? Like a full-on revolution, which like if we want to manage change, let's start managing change. Like we need to make it so much easier for people to form unions. It's the most popular thing in the country, like 70% approval rate. People agree on that. You talk to people in white collar jobs, blue collar jobs, they agree. Unions are the path to the future.
Well, I
So,
mean,
yeah,
to be honest, especially white collar jobs with the coming AI revolution that's coming, the tsunami of job losses that could happen. Last study I saw said, in the next 15 years, half of all the jobs we currently do could be wiped out. There's a moment for people to go, in my radical self-interest, maybe we should start protecting ourselves.
that's right. And this goes back to, it's very like humanizing to talk, like, right, to talk about family care, about how hard we've all worked through COVID, about the toll of COVID. And once you kind of break through those things, like I'm hearing from people in Douglas County in these white collar tech jobs at IBM, at places like Lockheed Martin, who are like, ooh, I'm already seeing the effects of AI. And I'm seeing it in a kind of bottom line in terms of like, oh, they fired people. Now I'm concerned. And I started to ask me like, so wait a second, what are these unions? You mean you can have a contract and you can put in protections about AI? And then they look to the big wins at like SAG-AFTRA. Like that's why the labor movement's amazing, right? We have examples. We know how to do this. So I am so excited to help bring that to the next kind of industries of the future and white collar jobs. Let's go.
Oh,
Rick.
it's
Let's go.
incredible. So last line of question I've got for you, as you're out there, doing the door knocking, the, kissing babies and shaking hands and all that, what are the top issues that people are talking about to you, and how do we fix them?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, housing's a big issue. The dollar is a big issue, right? Like it is literally a luxury to buy groceries for my generation. That's like the articles, but also the lived experience. I'm talking to folks on the ground, and it's corporate price gouging. There's no reason food needs to cost as much as it does. Look at the top line. Like we need to hold corporations responsible. And to be clear, when I say corporations, there are a lot of like entrepreneurial, small business, like spirited people in the West. I'm not talking about that. I want you guys to be competitive. I want people in the trades to be able to go into their own industry, to do their own startups, have their own businesses. I'm talking about the concentrated power at the top, the mega corporations who've been price gouging.
The 3 or 4 corporations that control an entire industry, from meat to cereal to whatever.
Boom. That's
You've
right.
got these handful of corporations that have the kind of outweighted power to basically destroy any bit of competition, and of course line their pockets, because if you listen to their earnings call, they're not struggling.
That's right.
So I got to tell you, I wish you the best. June 25th, special election in Colorado's 4th Congressional District. Check out Trisha's website, Trisha, the number 4 Colorado.com. We will get links out on social media. But Trisha Calvarese, I wish you the best. Always great talking with you.
You are amazing. Thank you. And solidarity forever.
Solidarity to you, sister. I appreciate it. I want to hear your thoughts. Email me, rick@thericksmithshow.com. What do you think? Big fan. Back after this.
Q Cells has been like the first around here that focuses on clean energy. For millennials, not a lot of us want to be jumping around job to job trying to figure out what we want to do. But in clean energy, we see a sense of job security and longevity, something that we're going to be able to do for a long time. It's important for Congress to invest in clean energy infrastructure because it sends a positive message to smaller communities like Dalton. It'll provide jobs for those that are struggling to meet their financial needs.
It takes a lot to raise a family. A good job, a good salary, and some patience. A lot of people my age are drowning in college debt, but I chose a different path. I'm a member of the IBEW, the International Brotherhood of Electrical Workers. I work hard for my job, and I love what I do. I had a lot of choices for my future, but I made the best choice for my family. IBEW, the right choice.
So Boeing just gave their CEO Uh, a $33 million pay package. Evidently, shareholders approved it. Look, their CEO, Dave Calhoun's about ready to leave the company in disgrace. I mean, the weird thing is the company could be held criminally liable for, the crashing things. And the weird thing is you look at the amount of money this guy's getting, a massive increase. I think it was like 45% increase from the amount he received back in 2022. And what they're calling the highest pay package ever, ever for a CEO at Boeing. And you go, well, what did he do? What did he do? Well, truth of the matter is, probably going to get them criminally prosecuted. Now, in 2021, they avoided it. That corporate thing where they defer, prosecution, so that you pay a big fine and you don't go to jail, but you promise not to do it again. And then over a period of time, if you don't, then they let it go. Well, it turns out 2 days before their agreement ended, had another incident. Could bring charges. But for that, $33 million pay package for the CEO that is leaving in disgrace. It's amazing to me. Just amazing. Also, story caught my attention. Did you know CVS, the drugstore people, they're the third largest Medicare Advantage company in the country. They're the third largest. And their CEO or their CFO, guy named Thomas Cowhay. Thomas Cowhay said that their goal in the next year is margin over membership. He said that they could lose up to 10% of our existing Medicare members. It's entirely possible, and that it's okay because they need to get back back on business track. And understand, they've lost a bit of money. I guess the first quarter earnings was $900 million below what they had predicted, and that they lost $400 million due to what was called heavy outpatient service utilization. It means sick people. People were sick, went to the doctor. People needed stuff. So what are they going to do? The third largest insurer of senior folk, because remember, they're sold Medicare Advantage. It can be all great. It's going to get you all these cute little stings. You're going to get sneakers. You're going to get gym memberships. You're going to get discounts to CVS. You're going to get all kinds of stuff. Amazing stuff. It's going to be great. So CVS, with its 4.2 million members, is talking about cutting 420,000 people from their roles. And I got to wonder which 420,000. Let's see. Who could it possibly? Maybe the people who are the sickest. Maybe the people who use the insurance because they need it. Maybe those folks. And this again is another reason why you don't privatize something vital like Medicare. Or to me, the idea of privatizing healthcare is ridiculous. But understand, in this country, what we've done is we've taken the most costly of the healthcare recipients out of the equation. Young people and old people. Over half of the kids in this country are born with Medicaid. And well, our old folks, once you hit 65, and I'm hoping to get there myself, Medicare. But again, like everything corporate America touches, it's about the profits. Everything that we used to do for ourselves as part of a social safety net, as part of the commons, as part of what Americans expect from their government. Well, we can privatize, profitize, and, well, ration, because we need more profits. This being part of this. So am I surprised that they're going to get rid of 10%? And which 10% they're going to get rid of. The sick people, which again end up on the back of Medicare. And this is the part that I have a struggle with, because again, Medicare is the backstop for all of this. You have these advantage plans, you have these privatized plans, who this guy's saying, look, it's about the money. The services we provide are secondary. It's about getting things back on business track. We need to make money. It's about profit. This is what we do. So it's all about the cash instead of about the service. And that's what Medicare was supposed to do. Say, look, it's not about the funding. It's not about the money. It's about getting the best results. It's about getting people well. It's about helping people. But not in this day and age. This day and age, it's about the profits. So I'm curious, and I'm hoping that someone will reach out. Have you heard from CVS? Are you a Medicare Advantage CVS holder? And are they sending letters on maybe who they're kicking to the curb? Have you had to use any of these services? Because look, most people that I talk to who have Medicare Advantage plans, they're great as long as you don't use it. But as soon as you have a chronic illness, as some seniors do, as some older folks do, well, it gets a whole lot more complicated. It gets a whole lot more hard to navigate the system with all of the, and we've already seen the stories with all the AI generated refusals and rejections. How much worse is it going to get? This is one of these moments where we, the people, need to claw back our Medicare from these corporate special interests and make sure that it's there when we need it. Want to hear your thoughts, though? Email me, rick@thericksmithshow.com. Miss a portion of the program, grab the podcast. And as always, thanks so much for being here. We'll see you back here next time.
You've been listening to The Rick Smith Show. Email Rick at rick@thericksmithshow.com. Until next time, this has been The Rick Smith Show, where working people come to talk.